When this machine, with its wooden roll and its metal pegs which tweak little levers to open and close the stops on the organ pipes and produce the right notes, first appeared on the streets, this was, to the many people who heard it, their first experience of recorded music. And once the engineers realized that they could capture the sound of music mechanically, that music was going to change.
Instead of a hedgehog robot stabbing out the notes, with a new control system, much grander performances became possible. By triggering several instruments at once using perforated paper rolls, the fairground was suddenly offering robot music as a new attraction.
It wasn't long before the new technology found its way into the home. This time, the paper roll triggers the notes using a system of suction. The pianola depends for its quality and its tempo on how skillfully I pump with my feet and manipulate the controls with my hand. There's no way that I can be certain of getting exactly the same performance of the piece of music out of the instrument every time I play it. It soon became possible on a more sophisticated piano to produce identical, virtuoso performances.
Here, the novelty was electricity, and enabling inventors to create a host of quite extraordinary music makers. The strings are fingered by tiny pads pushed up by a battery of electromagnets. Another electromagnet generates the tremolo, and an electric motor powers the wheels which bow the strings. And it was electrical contacts made through the perforated paper roll which drove the machine. The voice of Sir Harry Lauder, replayed on a phonograph. The phonograph, and later the gramophone, could capture complete performances. It was to take another breakthrough in recording equipment before those performances could be changed. This monster of the 1930s was one of the first magnetic recording machines.
Two giant reels like this whirled through the tape recorder at a frightening 60 inches a second. This stuff. A razor-sharp band of steel. And when this band broke, as it had a habit of doing, everybody had to be well clear of the sharp edge as it scythed viciously through the air. But the necessity of forever joining the steel band together became, in the hands of the creative musician, a virtue. When just before the Second World War, German engineers demonstrated that what you can do with steel, you can also do much more conveniently with plastic tape coated with a close relation to rust. With the new tape, and nothing more than a razor blade, new areas of musical creativity became possible.
The arrival of tape recorders meant even the most basic sounds could be transformed.
Even the earliest of tape recorders could manage quite happily the faithful reproduction of 3 notes twanged on the piano. It was the possibilities for unfaithful reproduction which also caused excitement. On this length of tape are those same 3 notes. If I wind this piece of tape through the machine by hand, at a speed which isn't constant and in a direction which is forever changing, those 3 twangs become a collection of quite different sounds. In fact, if we re-recorded this performance on another machine, I might end up with a sonata for 3 notes and tape recorder. But let's take this creativity a stage further. Let's find the start of the last note. There it is. I'll cut the tape there. Now I can take the end note, turn it the other way round, and put it back, ready to join up. So, what have we got now? Our first 2 notes are still the right way round, producing a boing sound with a quick start and a slow finish, or what musicians call sharp attack, gentle decay. Now we've turned the last note the wrong way round. We've got the decay first. Now it's become a sound. And if I finish the joins here, it should sound something like this.
The Doctor Who theme, just one of thousands of signature tunes, special effects and pieces of background music created by the Radiophonics Workshop since 1958. At this time, all over Europe, it was fashionable to make music out of the most unlikely thing. Anything that could make a sound could be doctored by the tape recorder. Now add all these bits together on a tape recorder. Play some of them backwards, some of them forwards, some at the wrong speed, and this is what you end up with. By playing around with tape, almost anything can become music. How about the first symphony for one straw? This bizarre performance was recorded to provide the background music for an Open University program about particle physics. Cutting out the gasps for air, the best bits of bubbling are selected to make a continuous loop. This loop of bubbles can now be re-recorded at various speeds. Soon there'll be enough bubble noises at different frequencies to play a tune. All these bubble frequencies are now individually transferred to a multi-track recorder before being mixed together to produce the final sound which will back the commentary voice and reinforce in musical terms the message of the program. Having carefully timed the bubble music, it can now be checked to see if it fits the pictures. Armed with a tape recorder or two, the creative soloist can turn himself into an orchestra. This first machine is recording, while a second replays that recording a few moments later for it to be re-recorded by the first recorder. Paddy Kingsland explains.
I'll show you how it works. You play a note on the guitar, and the notes are repeated. And that'll go on for as long as you like. And what you have to do then is add various lines to that. And the whole thing goes on. You can gradually add more and more sounds. Now, if you get too loud, you can overload the whole system, but it's possible to get a rather big build-up.
The leap from the natural to the supernatural came about because the experimenters were no longer satisfied with doctoring existing sounds. After all, why be tied to the strings of a piano when the world of electronics is full of noises of its own? Even if some are not all that easy on the ear. Now that sound is produced because whatever this microphone picks up is being fed to this loudspeaker, back to this microphone, to this loudspeaker, round and round and round in a self-perpetuating shriek of energy. But if we introduce an element of control into that, by only allowing the sounds of a certain pitch to go round and round and round, we've got a new possibility. Well, it's hardly Beethoven, but it's better than it was a second or two ago. Now, this device up here is an oscillator. It works on exactly the same principle. Inside there is an electronic circuit which is producing a noise. A filter removes from that noise the pitch that we want to hear and feeds that back into the front of the circuit. Round and round it goes once again, regenerating itself all the time, until in the end, all that comes out of here is that one pure frequency. Alter the filter, and we can alter the note that this produces. To the engineer, the oscillator is simply a test instrument. You feed that known frequency into whatever it is you're examining and see what comes out the other end. But to the experimental musician working back in the late 1950s, the discovery of the note that the oscillator could produce was like suddenly coming across one key on a piano. So they took one note on a keyboard and used that as the switch to turn the oscillator on and off. Then they found a second oscillator for that note, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, until they'd built up a collection of oscillators big enough to be the basis of supernatural music.
The oscillators provide the single frequencies for the tune, mixed here with white noise, a hissing sound, a blend of all frequencies, just as white light is a blend of all colors.
But there are limitations to what 6 oscillators and one small keyboard can do, and everybody's life was made easier by the arrival on the scene of an American, Dr. Robert Moog. Dr. Moog showed that one oscillator could produce many notes. Dr. Moog's principle was called voltage control. Each time the musician hit a key or altered one of the controls on the panel, he in effect transmitted a particular voltage across that part of the circuit that he was using. It was this voltage which controlled the output of the instrument, or the synthesizer, as it had now come to be called. Musicians who had been constrained in the past by the particular sound that a piano or a violin or a saxophone could produce found that with an instrument like this, they could produce the sound, the texture, the quality, the tone that up to now had only been in their heads. What do I mean by that? Well, listen, here's the note E. Here's exactly the same note. And still the same note. Why are the differences? Oh, it's just something to do with the tone, you may say. But armed with this equipment, we can be a lot more specific. Let's go back to that first version of the note E. And look at the display on this screen. Now, this is a frequency analyzer. And here you can see that that sound of E is one single tone, one lone frequency. All sounds are waves. And the faster those waves fluctuate in the air, the higher the note that we can hear. So a low note, a sound, has slow fluctuations. A slightly higher note has faster fluctuations, and a really high note has exceedingly fast fluctuations. Look at that on the oscilloscope. Let's freeze 1 split second in time, and we can see that the waveform which produces the lone frequency is an even, rolling shape, which the engineers call a sine wave. Now let's move on to our second version of E. That one. And straight away, we can see a quite different shape on the oscilloscope screen. The same number of fluctuations in that split second, but a waveform with a totally different shape. That's called a square wave. And why is it different? Well, the answer lies on the frequency analyzer. Look. No longer one pure tone. There's the fundamental, certainly the main note, that's E, but all these other ones too. They're harmonics. And a square wave includes all the odd ones, the third, the fifth, the seventh, and the ninth, gradually dying away. And then there's our third version of the same note. There on the frequency analyzer, you can see that that one includes all the harmonics, even and odd. And over on the oscilloscope, yet another waveform. Same number of fluctuations again, but a different shape from either of the other two. And that one is called a sawtooth. Using Dr. Moog's voltage control techniques, it's now become relatively easy for the musician to get these different waveforms to interact with one another, producing combinations of harmonics and tones unknown in the world of natural music.